guns and tasers for any actual or presumed threat. Zoe automatically tugged at the identification tag that hung loosely around her neck to make sure she hadn't forgotten it and its electronic identifier. Breathing became increasingly difficult for Zoe as she stood outside her workplace. The protective dome, along with the air scrubbers and increased oxygen pressure inside the buildings, remained the only efficient shield against the polluted air that smothered ambient oxygen. She pulled a traveling oxygen container from her backpack and tugged on the nasal tube. When the air started to flow, her panic ebbed. She hated wearing the gear and could breathe without it if respiratory diseases didn't immediately gain a foothold and start her on a downward spiral of pulmonary destruction. Craning her neck to search for the electromagno express pod, she heard a child whine, "Mommy, that woman stinks!" The child pointed at Zoe and held his nose while he yanked at his mother's hand, tugging her in the opposite direction. Other commuters took the boy's lead and edged away from Zoe, mumbling similar complaints. "She's dirty," the child said aloud. Zoe's face grew hot, but she refused to look at any one person. To cover her embarrassment, she stared at the hazy sky through the station's amber-tinted roof, but it only made things worse. She was just as trapped in here as she was in the laboratory. Everyone was trapped in one way or another, trapped on a dying planet. Was there a time when they didn't have to live under the massive domes where scrubbed air was piped in and rising temperatures were neutralized? Zoe remembered when she had lived in a real house with her parents. Sometimes a flash of memory gave her a fleeting view of a zoo, meadows, water ponds, even the splendor of a visit to a grove of giant redwoods. But many of those memories were turning into shadowy glimpses that were almost gone, like the glaciers and the vast forests with their oxygen-producing trees. Now everything on the globe was dead or dying from the drought, the unrelenting heat, and the scourge of the fatal viral malabsorption syndrome, a quirky mutation of the AIDS virus. Deadly environment, deadly disease. Soon no one would survive inside or outside the domes, and when all the remaining trees were gone, life on Earth would end. Zoe sighed, wasting the air left in her chest. If only she and her daughter could run away to live in the non-corp areas outside of San Francorp. At least she would be free. But every day corporate communications made the area sound not only desperate, but disorganized. Out there were hostiles, the unemployed, and the unknown. Would the bleak landscape and exposure to the elements be better than being trapped inside this covered city? The thought of running away was an easy daydream, until her chest tightened at the thought of breathing the polluted outside air. Could she put her little girl through that? When the pod arrived, she sat down and held on to the seat's armrest, jittering with vibrations as the anti-grav vehicle sped between the city's towering structures. In the past 2 years, a web-like array of interconnecting passageways had been completed, joining all the city's buildings. San Francorp's employees were now housed in tiny, expensive urban compounds. Suburban homes eroded outside of the domes, deserted, disintegrating, ghostly skeletons that dotted the dying landscape. She yearned for signs of color, plant life, living creatures. Her hunger for the outdoors never seemed to be satisfied. Looking through the window, she captured a fleeting glance of a bleak landscape, and even that was almost obliterated with the spread of uniform concrete gray edifices, distinguished only by the mundane names emblazoned on each building: corporate department store, corporate museum, corporate pharmaceuticals. She had been in the pod for 15 minutes when a sign reading Corporate Singles Complex No. 7 loomed like an eerie apparition floating from the skyline. She pulled herself up and leaned her head against a pole until they pulled into the bowels of the building. She sighed and stepped out of the pod. The organ preservative essence preceded and followed her. Zoe held her identification card up to the scanner and pressed her second and third fingertips against the DNA sensor to signal the vacuum lift. Once inside the lift, she braced herself against the wall for support, counting silently as the digital readout blinked each level. At 19, the car eased to a stop. "This is your floor, Dr. Hidalaga." Zoe grimaced at the metallic computer-generated voice and made her way down the long cement corridor to her apartment. Asher Wind Storm sat